here at topic 7.7, 1920s, innovations in communication and technology. And so, guys, what you're going to really need to understand here, really the key theme, is that a lot of the things that we take for granted in our modern life are going to be introduced for the first time in the 1920s. And this is going to be a theme that I'm going to continue to come back to. Some of the other things that we're going to focus on are going to be how society was changed by these things. So I want you to think about, without these things, what would society have been like? Society, culture, economics. So let's go ahead and dive into the details. So first of all, we have the automobile. So automobiles existed before the 1920s, but they were not really widely available. So Henry Ford is going to create something called the Model T, and he's going to really revolutionize manufacturing with the introduction of the assembly line in 1913. So before the assembly line, let's say George would be thrown a bunch of parts and put in the corner of a workshop and say, George, in a month or 2 months, you're going to have to produce a car. And so that car is going to cost a lot of money because you can't make very many of them. That way, it's hard to get somebody who can create the whole car by themselves, okay? Or maybe a few people working together, moving parts around. When they get the frame done, they have to go grab a bunch of other parts, bring them in. And so that way of producing things is going to be gone because Henry Ford introduces the assembly line. Now, instead of having a highly skilled person like George, you're going to have another person, or maybe even you're going to have George, instead of knowing how to do everything to put together a car, George is just going to be on an assembly line. A conveyor belt is going to bring the car to him, and he's just going to add the wheel or add the door or maybe even something smaller like that. And so think about it. How is this going to change the car? Well, first of all, it's going to significantly lower production costs, and that's going to make cars affordable for the average American. So the Model T, and it's going to be produced from 1908 to 1927, is going to symbolize this accessibility, and it was a game changer for personal mobility. In fact, you have to really think. Remember I said you want to think about how these changes are going to reshape modern American life? Well, so there's going to be some conservative people, maybe some religious people that are going to not like cars. They're going to call them like, I forget what it was, something like moving brothels or something like that. Because before this time, if a man wanted to date a woman, he would have to maybe go to her house, meet her parents, have a meal with them. And so there was going to be a lot of chaperoning of dating. And so now with the car, a guy can just go pick up a woman. Maybe his parents don't even know, and they can go out alone in this car. And maybe before this, that's not going to happen nearly as much. And so that's the Ford Model T, and it symbolizes that change with the introduction of automobiles on a mass level. Okay, so we had this guy, his name was Frederick Taylor, and he had these ideas of scientific principles of management, emphasizing efficiency and reducing tasks to their simplest components. And Ford really drew upon his ideas in creating the assembly line to mass produce the Model T. So this is a shift that's going to replace skilled labor with semi-skilled and unskilled workers, and it's going to really transform industrial work. Now, it's not going to be completely a loss. Why would I say it's a loss? Because before you had skilled workers and they were going to be paid more. Now you're going to have unskilled workers. Well, Ford is going to have this idea that if he pays his workers a little bit more, then his workers are going to be able to afford to buy his products. And so Ford does pay a little bit more. And we have this idea of capitalists are beginning to think, well, we need our people to be able to afford our products. And so they're raising wages a little bit. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason is that we're going to see as a lot of these products that are going to be produced by these scientific management principles are going to be labor saving products that even if you're making less money, maybe life's a little bit easier because you have something like a washing machine and you don't have to spend now 3 hours doing laundry. You can just throw it in, the machine does the work, and you can make dinner instead. Okay, so we have urban and suburban growth. So the automobile is going to spur the development of cities like Los Angeles and Houston, which adopted infrastructure to accommodate cars. And so if you think about a city like New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, their infrastructure is going to be built before cars come into being. And so that's why West Coast cities are very different looking. There's a lot more urban sprawl. There's not as much of a central business district in Los Angeles as there is in New York City. In Los Angeles, when I lived there, it seemed like the central business district was just like one street. It was like Figueroa Street, and that was about it. In New York City, the central business district is about as far as the eye can see. Why would that be? Well, because New York City is going to be a lot more compact. Why? Because it was made before cars, so people had to walk to get around, right? And so Los Angeles was made with the car in mind. People can just drive. And so you're going to have this idea of urban sprawl. The city is just going to keep on going. And I feel like Los Angeles goes for like 80 to 100 miles. Not that it's all Los Angeles proper, but it's just a continuous urban area that just keeps on going. And so suburban growth is going to take off as people can live further from their workplaces. And so cities are going to build wider boulevards, they're going to build shopping districts, they're going to build single family homes. And as I was saying, it's just going to promote this idea of urban sprawl. So think about the cultural impact of cars and how it's going to change lives. It's also going to bring a lot of new industries into place. We take it for granted that there's gas stations, service stations. Those are going to come into being. Things like diners, where as people are traveling on these roads and they want to stop and get something to eat, there's going to be tourist destinations that come into being. And so the mobility offered by automobiles is going to reshape American lifestyles and also American consumption patterns. And that's what we're going to talk about next, is some of these consumer products that come into being. We talked a little bit about assembly lines, and that model is going to spread from Ford and the Model T to other industries producing consumer goods like refrigerators, radios, washing machines, toasters, and each of these is going to have an immense impact on people's lives. So it's going to improve living standards. It's also going to improve societal expectations for cleanliness and household upkeep if you have things like refrigerators, and if you have washing machines to do your laundry for you, people are going to expect you to be a lot cleaner. And so advertising and credit. Companies are going to target women as primary consumers in their advertising. They're going to emphasize labor-saving devices. So advertising became a central feature of the consumer economy, using both print and radio to reach broad audiences. And so this idea of well-known brands, this is going to be, we take that for granted. Like, we all know what McDonald's is. We know the little song that goes with McDonald's. We know the different icons and logos and things like that go with different brands. And all of this mass consumer culture is coming into being here in the 1920s as advertisers are beginning to understand kind of the psychology of advertising. Also, I mentioned credit. So installment plans are going to make these expensive goods, so something like a washing machine, something like a refrigerator that used to be so expensive that only the very richest of the rich can afford it. Now, through mass production, through the assembly line, it's kind of within reach of people, but maybe they don't have all that money saved. No problem. The stores are going to extend credit, and someone can pay maybe a washing machine's $100. They can put $10 down, pay $5 a month for Let me see, what would that be? $90 for the next 45 months or something like that. So someone's going to be able to buy it on credit. And as I said, wages are rising during this time. And so people are just going to assume that, well, even if I can't afford it next year because my wages have risen for the last 3 years, next year we'll just be making more money and I'll be able to afford it by then. And so there's a lot of consumer confidence to buy these types of things. Also, another thing is electricity. So by the 1930s, 2/3 of American homes had electricity, and that's going to drive the demand for these electrical appliances even more. And as electricity is powering things that used to be done by hand power, like washing clothes, it's going to make life easier for American people. Okay, next is going to be the influence of the radio. Okay, so radio ownership is going to grow rapidly in the 1920s. So think about it, like there's a year at the beginning of the 1920s, 1923. Only 1% of Americans have a radio in 1923. By 1931, that's right after the 1920s has ended, the majority of Americans are going to have them. So this is going to cause radio to become this cultural unifier. So America used to be very sectional, meaning that the West, the Midwest, there was like farmers out there. The South, it was very agrarian in the South, and you had the North, the Northeast. It was very, you could think of business interests and factory owners in the Northeast. And there might have been like very different cultures, different styles of music, different immigrants are coming from different countries, and now radio is going to provide like a unifying culture. So the 1930 census even included a question about radio ownership, highlighting its cultural significance. So it's going to bring news, entertainment, it's going to bring music into homes, it's going to create a shared national culture. If you think about it, before radios came into home, if you're ever going to hear music, it's probably going to be live music. Occasionally, there's going to be some very wealthy people who can afford like a phonograph, but even at that, the quality is not going to be very good. So families are going to gather to listen to a variety of shows like soap operas, comedies, detective stories, and even live music that's being played for the radio. There's going to be popular programs like Amos and Andy that are going to entertain millions despite perpetrating racial stereotypes. So it's going to have a huge impact on music and sports. So you're going to have jazz music. So this music, jazz, it's going to come into being. It's going to start in New Orleans. It's going to be, it has African American roots to it. It comes out of things like some of the slave songs that were sung, maybe street callers who are selling things and they're singing as they're selling things. Some, maybe some church music. All of these things are going to come together and have this improvisational jazz music. And whereas before, probably something that was started with African American roots to it isn't going to spread to the rest of the society because radio is a cultural unifier. This jazz music is going to spread all over the country, and jazz is kind of like a symbol of the Roaring '20s. It's a symbol of the Flappers, which we'll talk about later. It's a symbol of the 1920s and in this time. Also, classical music, country music are going to reach large audiences. Also, there's going to be sports broadcasts that are going to turn athletes like Babe Ruth and Gertrude Ederle, who we'll talk about in a little bit, into household names. Now, speaking of sports, so there's going to be a sports boom. Now, this is another thing that we take for granted today. People have, like I said, some of the things that we've talked about, that you have a car, you can get around. We can do laundry in a washing machine. We can listen to music. A lot of people identify with the different types of music they listen to. Another thing that people identify with is sports teams. And this is something that didn't really exist before the 1920s. And so radio is going to bring live coverage to homes of sporting events, and there's going to be national interest in things like baseball, boxing, tennis, and football, but mainly baseball and boxing. At first it was just boxing, and then baseball was added into it. And this guy right here, this is Babe Ruth. And so he becomes a baseball legend and a cultural icon representing the spirit of the 1920s. There was a year in which he hit, I believe it was either 54 home runs, and then later he hit 59. And before that, the record of home runs was something like 12. Okay? And so if you have somebody hitting like 4 to 5 times as many home runs as were before, people are just going to tune into the radio and just like, who's this Babe Ruth guy? Is he going to hit another home run? And so it's going to create this buzz of energy around these types of cultural icons. Okay, there was also Jim Thorpe. He was an Olympic medalist and multi-sport athlete. He's going to play professional baseball, basketball, and football. And then you had a woman, her name was Gertrude Ederle, and she was the first woman to swim the English Channel, beating men's records. So you're going to have also college sports that are going to flourish, like college football. And so there you can see that sports are going to be a big thing that we take for granted that's going to start reshaping American society in the 1920s. And last but not least, a big thing that we take for granted that's a cultural unifier in America is movies. How many times have you heard somebody just say something ridiculous and you're like, oh yeah, that's a quote from a movie, and kind of like everybody knows what that is? Well, stuff like that did not exist before the 1920s. So Hollywood is going to emerge as the entertainment capital of the United States and eventually of the world. So why? Favorable weather and geography are going to make Southern California ideal for film production. By the 1920s, Hollywood dominated the industry, producing hundreds of feature films annually. So there's going to be, at first, there's going to be silent films in the studio system. Early movies were silent. You're going to have actors. The most famous one is going to be this guy. His name's Charlie Chaplin. Another one is Mary Pickford. They're going to become major stars. And at this time, studios are going to have very, very tight control. There's no Screen Actors Guild yet. And they're going to have tight control over the production, distribution, and exhibition of the movies. So this is the end of the silent era is going to come with a movie called The Jazz Singer. If you remember jazz, as I said, it's kind of symbolizes the 1920s itself. So this is going to be the first talkie. That's what they called movies where people could talk in them, the talkies. And it's going to revolutionize cinema, incorporating synchronized sound and music. So the success of The Jazz Singer in 1927 is going to mark the end of silent films and begin the golden age of Hollywood. So the cultural influence of movies is going to go beyond just the popularity of movies themselves. It's going to shape fashion industry. We know that people are very much into what movie stars are wearing, and movie stars are going to kind of be like the aristocracy of America, whereas maybe people in Europe are going to be looking to see what Prince George or whoever it is wearing. Here in America, people want to know what are the movie stars wearing? What is the fashion? The behavior and societal norms. Movies are going to shape those things. So weekly movie attendance is going to soar, reflecting movies' importance in American life. So guys, in conclusion, the 1920s were a transformative decade. It's going to be marked by groundbreaking innovations in communications and technology, and these changes are going to reshape American society, and a lot of the things that we take for granted, a lot of the things that we identify our individuality with, such as the music we listen to, the movies we like, the sports teams that we support, these are going to come into existence in the 1920s as parts of popular culture. So they're going to foster a shared national culture, and they're going to elevate standards of living. So the rise of mass media with radios, movies, advertising, brands created a consumer-oriented society and brought Americans closer together. So that is Unit 7.7.